He is a consultant rheumatologist in CRICR as well as Hosmet Hospital, Bangalore.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today in this session, we'll be discussing about the management of various autoimmune diseases. So this will give us a practical approach of the disease and how we manage the disease. So the first case is of a 22-year-old female who presented with pyrexia of unknown origin since 1 month, associated with erythematous rash over malar eminence. She also had history of frequent oral ulcers since 6 months. She also complained of fatigue and weight loss. And I think the diagnosis is obvious with this, because in the photo we show that the nasolabial fold is spared. So according to the ACR classification criteria for SLE, these are the points which are there. Here we have to remember that at the presentation, the patient might not present with all the symptoms in the beginning. It might occur over the course of time, and we should be open-minded, and we have to search for the symptoms in the beginning only so that we can diagnose the disease at an early stage. So according to the ACR classification criteria, there are 4 points are required out of the 11 points to tell that a patient is suffering from a definite SLE. But in our case, in this patient, it fulfills only 2 criteria. That's the malar rash and the oral ulcers. So now going back to the past history, there was an episode of pleural effusion 1 year back. AFB was not detected, and with this, it fulfills the 3rd criteria of serositis. So these are the usual investigations which we ask when we suspect any connective tissue diseases. So, and if in these investigations, if the ANA is positive, then we go for the further investigations of ANA profile, C3, C4, and the APLA workup. So here I mentioned the important findings in our patient, which is significant. It shows that the patient was suffering from anemia, and the total count was less, and ANA by immunofluorescence is 3+, and the ANA profile is there is dsDNA, anti-Smith antibodies, and anti-nucleosome antibodies are present, and C3 is slightly low. So now in this patient, it fulfills 6 criteria, that is the malar rash, oral ulcers, serositis, hematological disorder, and the immunological disorder. So with this, we can find that the patient is having SLE. We should also remember that the criteria are made for the trial patients, so that only SLE patients are included and not the other patients. But in practice, we have to go by our experience and the symptoms. So the principles of treatment of the acute illness, treating the chronic illness, managing the side effects of the disease, managing the side effects of the drugs, and managing the comorbidities of the disease. And also the last one is the organ-specific treatment strategies. Here, as already in the morning it was mentioned, SLEDAI, we have to use some scale to define what is the level of the disease. But in SLE, all these parameters are of not that much help. And usually, all the rheumatologists don't follow any particular thing for SLE, because all the things are not standardized and each follows a different thing. So there are very scales like SLEDAI, SLAM, BILAG, etc. So here in SLEDAI, they give important weightage to some important organs which are affected. So 8 points are given to a problem where it is more important, then the 4 points, then the 2 points, and the 1 points. So and they mentioned that if there is a change in SLEDAI of more than 3 points, it's a less than 3 points, it's a mild to moderate flare, whereas if it is more than 12, it's a severe flare. So here, what will be the treatment strategy of this patient we have seen? I'd like to ask the experts to discuss about what can be the best treatment method now.
In such a case, whenever a patient presents with any of these symptomatology suggestive of a multisystemic disorder and you are suspecting SLE, the first and foremost thing is, before starting treatment, now anyway we have confirmed it is a case of SLE, we have to segregate what are the major organs involved, what are the minor organs involved. So in this case, all the organ systems involved are minor. I think the hematological also we can consider this sort of cytopenias as minor organ involvement. Most of the minor organ involvement usually requires a low to moderate dose steroid initially, and simultaneously once cytopenias have resolved, we usually start a steroid sparing agent. And in all of these cases, hydroxychloroquine is a must. It is said that hydroxychloroquine should be put in the drinking water of an SLE patient.
Okay. So any other comments, sir?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So according to the SLEDAI scale, this shows that there are 8 points. Though sir told that it's a minor flare, but here it points out that it's a moderate flare. But again, we don't go by the SLEDAI scale, and we go according to the patient's symptoms. So here we have added only hydroxychloroquine and a small dose of steroids. And as sir told, later we can add a steroid sparing drug also. So after 3 months, she develops fever and increased fatigue, and urine shows 2+ proteins, and there is a mild decrease in C3. ESR is 56, CRP is 6.8, and the protein creatine ratio is 0.4 grams per day. So at this level, what can be the treatment strategies?
So now, we knew that the renal organ system is involved actually. So this patient has lupus nephritis. There is active sediment in it?
No, sir.
There is only 2+ proteinuria.
Only 2+ proteinuria, and it is less than, protein creatine ratio is less than 0.4. I mean, it is 0.4, so it is less than 0.5.
Yeah, there is definite lupus nephritis is there. As per the ACR guidelines, this case should undergo a renal biopsy, because sometimes the findings what you show on the urine might not reflect the true renal picture. However, my personal preference is, since there is no active sediment, the C3 is only mildly reduced, proteinuria is 2+, spot protein creatine ratio is less than 500, I would hike up the steroids. Ideally, I will discuss with the patient. Ideally, you should go and get a renal biopsy. If the patient is not willing, or if I would not try to force her, but I will tell, see, if you get it done, it is good, that is the standard of care. But in our scenario, if the patient is not rich, whatever it is, we can hike up the steroids and now start adding a steroid sparing agent at this is the stage where we have to add a steroid sparing agent. Even if you do a renal biopsy, most likely I feel we will get a class 1 or class 2 nephritis at this stage. However, occasionally we can get even a class 4. For such cases, the ACR has recommended renal biopsy in all cases of lupus nephritis. But this case should definitely respond with simple addition of steroid and a steroid sparing agent.
I also agree with Dr. Vishnuvardhan that in a lupus patient, a persistent proteinuria. So transient proteinuria is once you see a proteinuria, you rule out an infection, look for sediments. If there is a cast, then more likely to be it is due to lupus nephritis. So rule out other potential causes for proteinuria, and the proteinuria is again demonstrated on subsequent visits. Then there is a definite indication for renal biopsy, because without renal biopsy, very difficult to classify the lupus into either serious form or a milder form, because this has got a strong connotation with the treatment choice. If there is 3 or 4, we would choose cyclophosphamide and high dose steroids. If it is 2 or 1, we might continue with moderate dose of steroid and azathioprine. So it is ideal. But having said that, like Vishnu had told, many times at this situation, we are also, most of the time we don't push for, if the patient is not willing, we don't push, we increase the steroids, start them on azathioprine. So this is one example where SLEDAI may not be very useful, because rest of the organ systems have got better. She has got only little bit of proteinuria and sediment, low C3. So here SLEDAI, if you look at the scoring, it may not show a big increase, but for a single organ, there is a major change happening. So this is one example of fallacy of using a score in contrast to rheumatoid. Rheumatoid, all these measurements are very, very useful to assess the progression. Here it is little difficult.
Yeah, the only suggestion from my side is that these patients now need a little more frequent visit. See, now actually the patient in the previous might have been called 3 months later, or you can see him once in 6 weeks or 8 weeks. Now the frequency of visit should be little more reduced. Closely monitor the urine routine and urine sediments, as well the creatinine and the complement levels. Now the frequency of monitoring should become more closer, because you are looking at a possible disaster to happen. It's not happened, there is a probability. I mean, what I'm trying to say here is, see, this is a measure what helps you. I mean, all said and done, there is a lot of fallacy within the SLEDAI, etc. It shows the track the patient is now is moving from the track which was exclusively skin and oral mucosa, hematological, is looking like he is shifting the track to the renal. So now the moment the patient of lupus or vasculitis shifts the track to the renal side, your attention should increase. I mean, this is the point of fact in all connective tissue disease, including vasculitis. So actually the best way we always classify this group of these disease patients as dangerous patients or non-dangerous patients. Patients with renal disease are to be considered with severe red light and needs to be closely monitored for any problems that are likely to happen.
And in SLE, all the patients are dangerous because anytime they can become dangerous. So here, according to the SLEDAI, there is only a mild flare. That is the 3 points because of low complement and the fever. And in this patient, I have increased the steroid and I have added a AC inhibitor as a protein sparing thing and a hydroxychloroquine. After 6 months, because of irregular follow-up, she comes back with fatigue, peripheral edema, hypertension, and she is irregular with the medications. And on examination, her dsDNA is positive, C3 is 25, creatinine is 1.6, and urine shows 3 plus protein, and RBCs are 10. And the protein creatine ratio is 1.2 grams. So it is, as ACR guidelines states that if it is more than 0.5, we have to go for renal biopsy. A renal biopsy was done, and that showed lupus nephritis class 3. So the class 1 of lupus nephritis is minimal mesangial lupus nephritis, class 2 is mesangial proliferative lupus nephritis, class 3 is focal lupus nephritis, class 4 diffuse lupus nephritis, and class 5 membranous lupus nephritis, and 6 is advanced sclerosis with lupus nephritis. So at this time, what can be the treatment strategy? It's already evolved into the lupus
Now
nephritis. Yeah.
So this is a case of classical lupus nephritis. If you go back to the previous slide, not only the investigative findings, the hypertension in lupus, it means that it is usually, if you exclude the steroid mediated and all, usually it is due to active lupus 3 or 4. And the second thing is, in this case, we had a raised serum creatinine, active renal sediment, and significant proteinuria in a young girl within less than 1 year of onset of the disease. This is a poor prognostic factor. Despite they have given a class 3 lupus nephritis on the biopsy, this behavior is a class 4 behavior. I would prefer to start an endox on cyclophosphamide, urolupus nephritis protocol, a low dose cyclophosphamide. However, we can give an option of mycophenolate mofetil for this patient, depending upon the affordability, depending on the compliance. But even if the patient is affordable, my personal choice in an elevated serum creatinine, she looks like an aggressive SLA actually.
Yes.
So I would prefer a urolupus nephritis protocol with cyclophosphamide low dose. I will also explain to the patient that see there is a minimal risk of infertility associated with 500 milligram cyclophosphamide, but still the benefit outweighs the risk in this case.
So this demonstrates what Chandrasekhar was trying to tell in the previous comment. This patient probably should have come for much more frequent follow-up, and she also probably was irregular with the drugs. And when she has come back with the worst consequence, and probably what started as a mild nephritis, she has come with a much more frank nephritis. And treatment strategy is maybe 3 doses of pulse salmeterol, methylprednisolone, 500 milligram to 1000 milligram, and cyclophosphamide would be the drug of choice, and mycophenolate would be an acceptable alternative if cyclophosphamide is contraindicated.
Sir, what about Azoran, sir?
And after the induction, so you use cyclophosphamide or mycophenolate to cause as an induction treatment. After Euro-lupus regimen is 500 milligram every 2 weeks for 6 doses and follow it up with azathioprine or mycophenolate to maintain the remission. So lupus nephritis treatment can be classified into like oncology, remission induction regimen and maintenance remission maintenance regimen. So remission induction regimen is high dose steroids and cyclophosphamide or mycophenolate. There are 2-3 choices are there. And maintenance therapy is low dose steroid with azathioprine, and all these patients should continue hydroxychloroquine as a baseline therapy.
And
Yeah, I mean that's the right way actually. The best choice in this patient is to go for endoxan. I mean, looking at what I say is these are the things which are off the measures. See, you need to see the patient. There are few things which is not recordable by the measures. Patient is a very irregular patient. The patients of this nature should not be much advised to be depend on the oral medications. The reason is, if you are with mycophenolate, it's an oral medication requiring 3 to 5 tablets. The patient who has a possible threat of a lupus nephritis, despite convincing or conveying it across to the patient that likely you may have a problem, the patient was irregular in her way of coming and going. That clearly indicates that this patient is little different from others. See, this is where the new concept of personalized medical care is coming. It's not just genetics, it's not just the disease, it's also the patient behavior. You have to put all these three together where your success of treating this patient matters. The best in these patients, convince whatever could be the fertility or infertility. First is she need to survive. So the best is to go her with endoxan. There are some drugs which can prevent the fertility being affected. You use those estrogen blockers and try to protect the ovaries. Continue with the cyclophosphamide, full dose, induce remission, and then go for maintenance with azathioprine and such group of drugs.
so in this patient, according to SLEDAI, there is a moderate flare, but we are using a high immunomodulators. So here we are given a pulse steroid and pulse cyclophosphamide, and also we are given a gonadotropin releasing hormone analog, so as to prevent the ovarian failure. So the ACR guidelines states that patients with clinical evidence of active or previously untreated lupus nephritis should have a renal biopsy to classify the disease. All patients should receive hydroxychloroquine unless contraindicated. Glucocorticoids plus either cyclophosphamide intravenously or mycophenolate mofetil should be administered in patients with class 3 and 4. As mycophenolate is costly, we can substitute with Azoran in the poor patients if they are not willing for mycophenolate. Patients with class 1 and 2 nephritis do not require immunosuppressive therapy. And ACE inhibitors or angiotensin receptor blockers should be administered if proteinuria reaches or exceeds 0.5 grams per day. And the blood pressure should be maintained at or below 130 by 80 millimeters of mercury. Patients with class 5 lupus nephritis are generally treated with prednisone for 1 to 3 months, followed by a tapering for 1 to 2 years. So if there is any other questions, you can ask. Yes, sir.
How much dose you give?
It depends upon the body weight. Usually we have two different regimes. We give it as 10 to 15 milligram per kg.
10 to 50.
10 to 15 milligram per kg.
Right, sir.
And there are fixed doses also, 500 mg and 1000 mg.
How frequent you give this pulse therapy?
We'll have to give it for at least 6 cycles for the induction of the therapy. So then after that remission, we can give it once in 3 months, or we can change over to the mycophenolate or Azoran.
Is there any guidelines as to when or if we can bring down and stop the DMRDs in a patient with complete remission? Might not be, I'm not talking about the severe category, smaller like arthritis and skin lesions.
You mean the lupus?
Not with renal involvement, arthritis and skin involvement only. If there's a complete remission, can we stop, or is there a guidelines as to when we can stop the only DMRDs?
See, currently the guidelines with reference to lupus, withdrawing the medications are not available. Practically what we do is, see, if the patient is on a total remission, not having a repeated skin lesions, no oral ulcers, no musculoskeletal symptoms for nearly a year or two, we would like to slowly bring down the hydroxychloroquine. say from 7 days to 5 days, 5 days to alternate days, and the moment he relapses, come back, or if it doesn't relapse, still bring it down as less as possible, with a no promise that you will be stopping at any point of time. The current standpoint is that it is preferable to continue hydroxychloroquine as long as patient takes. So the end game is sometimes the patient may discontinue, but we need to see what really happens to this group of patients, because there is an element of something what is called a spontaneous remission in few of these patients, which can happen in 10 to 20% of the patients. 10 to 20 is too small a percentage to take a risk in large number. So it's basically a meticulous discussion with the patients. Patients are ready to go with that kind of risks, with that written consent. You can make the point that it's he who is withdrawing, not you, because you don't have a guidelines to withdraw it actually.
In other words, we always try to taper the steroid. Of all the drugs, steroid is the biggest villain. So we, if possible, earlier days when we were trainees, we were told that not to stop steroid at all. 5 milligram maintenance rest of their life. Now the tendency is to try to stop steroid. And to help us to stop steroid, we would continue hydroxychloroquine on a long-term basis. And if the patient has shown a disease activity of more than say few years before they achieved remission, then we would never stop. There are few patients like one spark, they come to with one malar rash, one few arthritis, for few months duration, you start steroid, they remit, then they remain in remission for 2-3 full years. In that case, I will do what Chandrasekhar would suggest: stop steroids, taper the hydroxychloroquine to an alternate day dose, and keep it, and withdrawal at her own risk. We would generally not advocate stopping in hydroxychloroquine in lupus, but we would try to stop steroid first. If mycophenolate, azathioprine helps, we would use that first. Then next step is to reduce the mycophenolate or azathioprine. Keep the hydroxychloroquine reasonably full dose until we withdraw the immunosuppressives. Then think about hydroxychloroquine. So hydroxychloroquine is going to stay long term.
Also, we have to educate the patients regarding the sun protection and the prevention of infections. That will also play a big role in management of SLE. Usually, retinal complications occurs after taking it for more than 5 years. So, if they go even for annual eye checkup, that's better. So, baseline we can get an eye checkup done. Then once in 5 years is also fine, or annually also
And
it's
then
fine.
if they happen, then that is also out, and then you go back to steroids.
No, as far as the retinal toxicity is concerned of hydroxychloroquine, it is more hype than what it is. See, the incidence of a retinal toxicity in the first 5 years is 1 out of 1 million. And this increases to 1 out of 50,000 in the subsequent 5 years. Then it is supposed to be 1 out of 10,000 after 10 years. I can tell you this incidence is too low, and it's not as much it is really scared or put it across. That's why the recent recommendation has been reviewed. Earlier we used to say, if you remember in 96, 97, we used to send the patient every 3rd month or 6 months for an eye checkup as soon as we started hydroxychloroquine. Now the recommendation has been changed or modified. It says in first 5 years, once a year, and subsequently once in 6 months, or subsequently go to once in 3 months if she stretches beyond 10 years. And of course, there are some vulnerable population which you have to pick up. A person with a high myopics, and the persons with pre-existing retinal diseases like detachments, etc., or pre-existing impaired vision as such. These are the patients who may to be categorized as risk category, and they should be followed at much more frequent interval than in any other patients. We have patients, I think all of us, Dr. Dharmanand, myself, and who have practiced more than 15 years, there are patients who are taking this drug from last 15 years. I mean, even their eye checkup, they say normal, no stain seen. So we have quite a good, we might have seen in last 15 years, maybe have seen around 5 patients with a retinal toxicity documented. I can tell you, I have managed totally around 30,000 rheumatoid arthritis in last 15 years.
See, regarding one practical aspect of HCQS and eye toxicity is, nowadays people all the patients refer internet for all the drugs we write. So the first thing it catches their eye is the ocular toxicity. Obviously a normal layman will be very afraid of ocular toxicity. The biggest problem with ocular screening for HCQS toxicity is Nowadays, lot of new gadgets have come, like OCT and all. So they become very, very minute abnormalities even in the normal retina. So they will document that some retinal dysfunction is there, you need to closely follow. So as rheumatologists, we feel it very difficult to convince the patient that see already you have a very minor some retinal problem and on the top of it you are prescribing a hydroxychloroquine. So recently the John Hopkins Lupus Center has come out with a recommendation. Your eye checkup for HCQS toxicity should not be based on ultra sensitive OCT testings. Should be just based on old age fundus examination, dilated pupil examinations and the peripheral field chart with Amsler grade. So many newer investigations in advanced optical centers are coming. They will pick up even very normal minute abnormalities which are widely prevalent in normal population. They should not be a hindrance to prescription of HCQS.
Extremely well said, Dr. Vishnu. Because new technologies are picking up lot of noises, like our MRI. If any one of us, if I go to MRI, we will have a C4. The patient will say, I have C3, C4, I have C6. So patients we have made normal people, people with spondylosis, disc prolapse. Everybody seems to have some L4, L3, 2, L3, L4 disc prolapse. So it's like MRI. This technology, ophthalmology technologies are very, very sensitive. They pick up lot of noise. Lot of usual changes which occur in diabetes, SLE itself can cause some problems in this test that should not deter us from using hydroxychloroquine. So fear of eye toxicity should not defer us from writing hydroxychloroquine, because hydroxychloroquine saves lives, prevents flares, and supposed to reduce clots, may improve cholesterol, and may help the patient to fight infection. So it is the most essential drug. All SLAs, hydroxychloroquine all the time. This is the current rule in lupus.
It really prevents the progression of the disease. Actually. It's one of the wonderful drug, even in rheumatoid or any other drug. It prevents the progressive maturation of the disease. I mean, leave apart the immunological process it interferes, but it's a good, safe, cheap drug which is available in the market. Actually. If there are no
Thank
more
you.
questions, probably we will proceed to the next case.